But his pride refused to surrender. "She's just a maid," he told himself. Even as Grace became the heartbeat of the house, one stormy night Emily's condition worsened. Richard paced the halls, his face pale with fear. Doctors came and went, shaking their heads. Grace stayed by Emily's side, holding her hand, whispering songs her mother once sang. At dawn, Richard found Grace still awake, her hand wrapped around Emily's fragile fingers. He stared, a question burning in his chest. "Why do you care so much?" Grace's eyes met his. "Because once I lost a child, too." The words hit Richard like a hammer. Grace's secret spilled like lightning in the dark. She told him of her son, gone too soon, buried in a world that had no mercy for the poor. Her pain was raw, but it was the same pain Richard hid beneath his wealth. For the first time, Richard saw her not as a maid, but as a mirror. Days turned into weeks. Grace's bond with Emily grew stronger. Richard tried to keep his distance. But every time Emily laughed, he found himself silently thanking Grace. Slowly, his shouts grew quieter. His anger dulled. But one night, the storm returned, this time inside the mansion. Richard's business empire was crumbling. Investors pulled out, lawsuits piled high. In rage, he smashed a vase and yelled at Grace to leave. "You think you can fix my life?" "You're nothing." Grace stood firm, her voice steady. "Your daughter doesn't need your money. She needs your love." Her words echoed through the empty halls. Emily, weak but awake, whispered from her bed. "Daddy." "Please listen." Richard broke. He fell to his knees beside her, tears streaming for the first time in years. "I don't know how to love without fear," he admitted. Grace placed her hand on his shoulder. "Then start with honesty." From that day, the mansion changed. Richard still had his flaws, but his heart softened. He apologized to the staff. He spent more time by Emily's side, reading to her, holding her hand, listening. Grace became not just a maid, but family. But fate was cruel. Emily's health declined rapidly. Doctors gave her weeks at best. Richard refused to let go. He begged every hospital, every specialist. Nothing worked. One night, Emily whispered to Grace, "When I'm gone, promise me you won't leave Daddy alone." Grace's eyes filled with tears. She nodded. "I promise." The night Emily passed, the mansion fell silent. Richard's cries shook the walls. Grace stayed beside him, holding him the way no one else dared. Days after the funeral, Richard sat in the empty dining hall, staring at the untouched silver plates. Grace entered quietly, placing a single candle on the table. "Darkness doesn't win if you let light in," she said softly. Richard looked at her, truly looked at her, and realized something he had ignored all along. She had saved him. Not just his house. Months passed. The mansion no longer echoed with anger. It breathed with warmth. Richard rebuilt not just his empire, but his heart. Grace never left his side. People in the city whispered rumors. Some said the millionaire had finally gone soft. Others said the maid had tamed the beast. But the truth was far simpler. Together, they had found healing in the ruins of their pain. Years later, a statue stood in the garden. Not of Richard, not of wealth, but of Emily, her smile carved in stone, flowers blooming at her feet, and beneath it a plaque read, "Love is stronger than fear." The mansion was no longer a prison of marble and gold. It was a sanctuary of memory, resilience, and rebirth. And for the first time in decades, Richard Anderson wasn't known as the cruelest millionaire. He was known as a father who had finally learned how to love. What can we learn from the story of Richard Anderson, his fragile daughter Emily, and the woman named Grace who entered their lives like a quiet light? At first, it may seem like a story of wealth, sickness, and grief. But in truth, it is a lesson about the things we often ignore in our own lives, about love, about fear, and about the choices we make when pain seems unbearable. Richard Anderson had everything a man could dream of: wealth, power, luxury, the kind of influence that could move entire cities. Yet in the grand silence of his mansion, he was the loneliest man alive. His daughter Emily was dying, and all his millions, all his businesses, all his connections, none of them could save her. Money could buy doctors, but not health. It could buy medicines, but not a cure. It could buy time on a clock, but not more days in his daughter's life. Instead of facing this truth with humility, Richard chose anger. He shouted at his staff. He dismissed those who served him. He broke objects, raised his voice, and wore cruelty like a crown. To the outside world, he was the city's coldest millionaire. But inside, he was simply a father drowning in fear. Emily, though young and weak, saw what no one else did. She knew her father's rage was not born of hatred. It was born of terror. The terror of losing her. And while she suffered quietly with her illness, she also suffered watching him destroy himself in front of her. Then came Grace, the woman who entered not with wealth, not with power, but with compassion. She was not intimidated by marble floors or golden chandeliers. She treated the mansion not as a workplace, but as a home. And slowly, she became the bridge between a father and a daughter, who were both trapped in silence. Grace carried her own wounds. She too had once been a parent, but unlike Richard, she had lost her child completely. Her pain was not hidden behind wealth or anger. It was etched into her soul, and yet she chose to live with kindness. She did not allow grief to harden her heart. Instead, she allowed it to teach her tenderness. This is one of the first lessons we take from this story. Life will break us all in different ways, but we choose whether to let the breaking turn us into stone or into light. Richard became stone. Grace became light. And Emily, in her fragile innocence, became the reason both of them learned to see each other's truth. As days turned into weeks, Richard began to change. At first, he resisted. His pride whispered to him that Grace was just a maid, that she had no right to challenge him. But her calm strength, her refusal to answer anger with fear, chipped away at his walls. She reminded him that his daughter did not need more money. She needed love. She needed presence. She needed a father, not a millionaire,